Hey, ladies and gents, and welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, where we talk about video games and everything happening in the industry, episode 221. I am your host, Jerrad Wyche. As always, I am joined by my amazing co-host, Dominic Orlando.
I have a lot more Neo stuff to blabber about today.
A lot more Neo on the table. I don't actually have too much to talk about in terms of what we've been playing, but we have some news to get through. Some updates for Hogwarts Legacy, the troubled Harry Potter game that people have been dreaming of having. And obviously it's one of those monkey's paw situations where your wish comes true, but there is a caveat to it. But we have some positive updates for it. We have some news in terms of acquisitions in the video game space. Seems like we can't go more than a couple of weeks without a new acquisition. The consolidation of the industry is real. And lastly, we want to talk about this new Nintendo Switch stuff that came up via Bloomberg. Interesting tidbits there. Let's hop into the rundown. First up, we're going to be talking about Hogwarts Legacy. If you're unfamiliar, somehow, some way, this RPG was revealed. It looked really cool. Then we got some heartbreaking stuff because obviously the moment it was revealed, people realized if I buy this game, I'm going to be giving money to J.K. Rowling. If you've lived under a rock, J.K. Rowling is pretty transphobic. And it's not one of these things where she was misheard or her quotes were taken out of context. It's a pretty common thing that she happens to display over and over again about her feelings towards trans people. And her rhetoric is rather dangerous, so.
And you're right. It's not like a someone who made an inappropriate joke or said one thing that was wrong and realized it or just kind of brushed it aside. Like, no, this is something like she really believes in and is important to her, and she's encouraging certain ideologies that are, like you said, harmful.
Especially for a figure who's very well known amongst a younger demographic, as well as to us millennials, because we grew up with Harry Potter, and morphing people's minds into thinking these things that just genuinely aren't true about the trans community is very harmful, which is sad because I would argue to say that a lot of the Harry Potter fan base was LGBTQ and trans, and it felt very open and inclusive, and it was just heartbreaking to see this happen, how somebody can write something so progressive in ways and yet still be tied to old ideologies. That being said, some of her writing does show how problematic she can be, where some of her characters are named, some of their personality traits. So if you look into the writing, you can see where a lot of her problematic tendencies lie. That being said, we have some positive news from Jason Schreier. So he tweeted, Hogwarts Legacy will have trans-inclusive character creation with body, voice, and gender, witch, wizard, all separated, sources say. This news follows J.K. Rowling's transphobic comments and the recent discovery that a producer supports Gamergate. Now, we obviously don't need to get into Gamergate. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably familiar with that whole situation. Before we get into the second part of this, Dom, this seems like a good step in a right direction for the game, but do you think that this will ultimately do anything when this game releases in terms of people overlooking the fact that J.K. Rowling is going to profit off of this game?
Yeah, it's tough because it was already it's already that same great question of if I buy this, then she's getting some of this money, but also there's a whole dev team and all the studio and the publisher and stuff that have distanced themselves from what she said, right? And do they deserve to also get punished for what she's doing, right? So there's already that kind of gray line. And so then when you add in, not only is the dev team distancing themselves from her comments, but they're actively doing things that they can to work against what the side that she's on, basically, right? So this is a super cool thing, and if there's a silver lining from all this, it's hopefully more games start to do that too. And my your kind of dream in the back of your head is hopefully she gets wind of this and decides, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this game. I don't want the money from this game specifically out of all my Harry Potter stuff. I don't want those royalties. That would be cool, right? That would be everyone's dream scenario. She gets to go on her merry way being a bigot, and we get to guilt-free buy the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's added layers to this, right? Because you are correct in your statement saying that, like, well, the developers are working on this and doesn't their work deserve to be appreciated? But like I just mentioned, they have a producer that supports Gamergate. He's also actively bigoted. So it's like an additional layer to that. But fear not, there's some positive news. That said producer has since resigned from WB Avalanche Software. He tweeted some snarky messages saying like his relationships are still good there, but he decided to resign. In my opinion, this totally reads as like, hey, we're going to fire you. You can resign if you want to. You know what I mean? That's what it
Yeah.
totally reads as to me, because the PR nightmare from this, on top of already dealing with the J.K. Rowling connection, the moment they probably understood that people knew about his connection to Gamergate and his awful YouTube channel spewing bigoted nonsense, I think they were like, yeah, we're going to fire you or you can resign. What do you want to do? What do you think about that? Do you think it's like he was in total control, or do you think this is one of those things where they gave him the respectable out despite him maybe not deserving that entirely for his actions?
Yeah, I get the same vibe, right? Maybe that even means like severance or whatever the heck.
Yeah.
But just to avoid, like, it was like, can you just like go, please? Like,
Yeah.
let's make this easy. Like, we don't want to, whatever. Um, and maybe that's best, even if it's not everything he deserved. But
And maybe it's not even that
tough.
serious. Maybe when all of this stuff broke and they were talking about adding this trans inclusive character creation, maybe as a producer of the game, he wasn't, for that entirely of, transitioning their whole
Right.
vision, which is, even then it's like you're making a character creator. It's not that big of a deal to include people, but maybe that was a breaking point for him. And but I just don't see it that way. I think it's with all of the news that surrounded the discovery of his YouTube channel and all of that. I think Avalanche Software was like, they were already getting over like, hey, we got this idea to roll out this trans inclusive character creation. This will give us some good points despite us still being attached to J.K. Rowling. And then right over the hill, they saw this coming like Gandalf in the Two Towers. You know what I mean? They saw this beacon, and when it came over the hill, it was actually this bigoted producer on their game that they ended up having to fire. So, but it's awesome that he's no longer a part of the team, because once again, like you said, it's a bonus. I would love if J.K. Rowling's like, oh, if they're gonna keep supporting this, it's not something I want to support with Harry Potter. And there's like some story. Maybe they even come to a thing where they strike a like a buyout in terms of royalties for the specific project, right? They're like, okay, we'll give you this lump sum money up front, like WB, right, as the publisher, and then there's an announcement that like J.K. Rowling will earn no profits from the game, so that way when, like you said, the guilt-free purchase of it, right? Because it is going to be tough for people, and the way J.K. Rowling talks about this stuff, I doubt by this time next year she had have gone a year without saying something stupid. So we'll see what happens there. But I wanted to add this too, that Schreier continued. Some members of the Hogwarts Legacy dev team had been pushing hard for this in regards to the trans inclusive character creation. Uncomfortable with Rowling's position and rattled by the effect she has had on the game they've put a lot into. So just kind of clarifying what we had talked about, where these developers have put a lot of hard work into this. Like I mentioned at the top, there's a couple of projects in terms of like IP that's going unused that people want, right, Dom? Like I mentioned, Lord of the Rings. People want a really stellar canon like Lord of the Rings video game. Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor are cool, but they're not necessarily canon, and it doesn't feel like the grandiose Lord of the Rings title people want. People have wanted a Harry Potter RPG. People want like a big Game of Thrones game. That's kind of why people are excited for Elden Ring with George R. R. Martin being attached. Um, do you think that this could possibly be an issue moving forward, where these big IPs end up having these creators attached to them? That I'm not lumping George R. R. Martin in with J.K. Rowling. I'm just saying in the future, somebody creates something, it's popular, it's attached to something, they say something stupid, and then like a game project gets hurt by it. Like, do you think this is a problem we can look forward to in the future? Or do you think that most creatives tend to be forward-thinking progressives, and we probably won't have to deal with this too often?
I mean, yeah, it's gonna be super rare, right? Because like J.K. Rowling created all of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like basically like she owns it, So like, so you think of like how many people there are that own singularly large IPs like that. It's very few, because most are like corporate, right? Now, like if you look at any like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, there's not really singular people in charge of all of it. Where like their views could kind of start to poison the well. So like, I mean, just like we saw with Star Wars, they had one employee who was very public facing that, you know, just continued like to be problematic. So like, well, she's gone, you know. Well, you can't just get rid of J.K. Rowling, you know, that she owns it all. So like, I guess that is like a weird pro of IPs being owned by committee. You know,
yeah,
like,
or even like Lord of the Rings, right? It's owned by like the Tolkien family estate. It's not a singular Tolkien member, right? So
it would take the whole family, really. Yeah.
Exactly. And I, to your point, I think the only thing I can think of off the top of my head real quickly are George R.R. Martin with Game of Thrones, which I'm also not entirely clear if he owns outright. I don't know if he just has consulting privileges for the IP. I'm completely unclear on that. But the only other comparison directly to J.K. Rowling would be Tesla, right?
Sure.
Why is his name escaping me? Jesus Christ.
Elon
Musk, right? He says something dumb, and then Tesla's stock goes down or goes up, depending on what he says. And his viewpoints directly affect his company because he's... But
even then, we've seen that happen, and if it's bad enough, like, he can get kicked to the curb too, right? Like, I don't know the guy's name that was in charge of Papa John's, right? I feel like he was the CEO. But he was saying enough stupid things. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was like something racist that he really was propagating, and they made him leave. They said you got to go, like the board, right? They're like you're screwing us all over. You're being a dick for one, and you're hurting our company. So like figure it out. And
I guess that's different, right? Because we're talking about companies versus IP. So it's I guess it's a little bit different in my comparison there, because companies tend to be publicly traded for the most part, and then when stockholders are added in, then it's different than a creative wholly owning the license to a property and earning money off of it, right? So I guess it's partially different, but I guess you're right in the sense that we probably don't have to worry about this happening at all really in the future, and maybe in very rare cases.
And it's all about like, this is like one of the, like, we can like bag on like, you know, capitalism a lot for a lot of reasons, but this is like kind of a good part of it where like collectively we can kind of like enforce, I don't say enforce, but like, you know, we can kind of like make it known like this is what's wrong and what's right, and like the public can kind of have a greater voice collectively. You know, that's what it looks like to me. Like we're deciding, like no one's getting canceled. This isn't like, you know, like we're in North Korea or something and like one person is deciding what's wrong, right and wrong. It's like we're all deciding, like, you know, J.K. Rowling, we don't really like what you're saying.
As recent as last week, people voting with their wallets worked, right? We saw how the failure of Anthem led to EA saying like, yo, Dragon Age 4 is just going to be a single player title, right? Because Jedi Fallen Order sold so well. So it was on both sides of voting with your wallet. People went out and bought a really good Star Wars game because it was good and they enjoyed it. And then people didn't purchase Anthem because it was bad, and they voted with their wallets. And because of that, those two decisions collectively made it so Dragon Age is going to be the game most people would want. You know what I mean? So voting with your wallets does help. And I wonder where this is going to happen, because Jason Schreier in his tweet also went on to say that this game's at the very least a year out. And I wonder if, you know, we talked about, is the added time because the game's not in great shape? Is the added time because J.K. Rowling, they want to kind of separate themselves publicly in terms of the optics? Maybe the delay too is like some legal stuff. Maybe it's to legally work out something to where they can distance themselves from J.K. Rowling. You know, like I wonder, because we know WB has licensing for Harry Potter across the board, right? With the movies, with everything. I wonder if WB is trying to figure out a way to work around this too, because they know they're going to lose money based on J.K. Rowling's comments. Like they know that. They're smart people. They're probably understanding the trends of like, when they signed this deal and they started making this game, they probably saw the money signs in their eyes, right? Of like a Harry Potter AAA RPG, this thing's going to sell through the roof. And then the J.K. Rowling comments started happening. And then they were like, okay, maybe people won't make it that much of a deal. She's not really attached to the game. She owns Harry Potter, but it's different. And then they started seeing all the public comments and all this stuff. And I think it just snowballed to a point where it could be legal stuff they're having to deal with right now. Who knows? In a year, we'll find out. I will say the game looks really fun. It's a game I want to play, but morally, I am in a place where I don't know what the right answer is, because part of me wants to give money to help the developers and show them that I appreciate what they're doing. Part of me also doesn't want to put money into J.K. Rowling's hands. Part of me might end up actually putting $60 towards this game and then donating $60 towards a trans charity of some sort. maybe a trans suicide prevention line or something, right? Um, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is, but we'll see what happens the following year. It's a tough thing to talk about, but I'm glad that guy is out. I'm glad that they're working on things to make the trans community feel more inclusive. But there's a lot more steps for them to make, and we'll see what happens there. Are you kind of in the same boat, Dom, where it's kind of tough to understand what the right thing to do in this situation is necessarily?
Yeah, definitely. It's just for me, it's really really easy because I have never read a Harry
Been
Potter
a Harry
book
Potter,
nor seen a movie, so I don't care about this game in either case. So it's an easy answer for me, right? Like I don't have the same pressure. So, but
if you say it was an IP you cared about, right? Say it was,
yeah.
I don't know. Say it was Star Wars, right? And George Lucas still wholly owned Star Wars, and it was Star Wars and George Lucas in the situation. Just replace those two things. How would you feel about this?
Yeah, it'd be the same thing. That'd be like really tough. I would hope that I don't know. I hope that like someone somewhere is like trying to figure out a solution. Like you mentioned, like trying to like can we carve out like parts like can you just step away from the IP and like take this lump sum or at least for the specific movies or games. I don't know if that's possible, but like yeah, that'd be so hard. Especially when the IP itself, like you said, has had like a positive impact in some of the areas that she's now negatively impacting. It's kind of crazy. Like, how can you like seem to have been so inclusive through so much of your work, aside from some of those hints that you mentioned that she wasn't, but it's just weird. It's like to me, it's like that annoying infighting, and like maybe because you've been punched down on, you feel like you need to also punch down on the more oppressed group. I don't know. It really drives me nuts. It's like, I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know the right answer, man.
I mean, I think it's partially that thing where people get older and they stop understanding the world around them. And for the most part, I'm not saying that there isn't bigoted people towards the trans community that are younger, millennials and younger, but it does seem like this is just one of those things where she's an older woman. She doesn't necessarily understand, the trans community, and it kind of goes against what she was raised for. Instead of being an intellectual and educated person and kind of learning about something you don't know about, she is deciding to oppose it and dangerously comment on it, knowing damn well the platform she holds. It's just really upsetting. And I do think as much as they try to do this inclusive stuff and paint themselves in a good light, I do think the only thing that's going to salvage this in a lot of people's minds is like a declarative statement that she won't profit on this game. And I just don't know if that's realistic. I don't know if that's even possible.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. In some more interesting news, let's get off that discussion. Fall Guys, which is a really popular, multiplayer physics-based romp of a time, it's going to be coming to PlayStation 4. Nintendo Switch, and it's already on PlayStation 4. It's coming to Nintendo Switch and Xbox this summer. Mediatonic, the studio behind the game, has been purchased by Epic Games. If you don't remember, Epic Games has already purchased Rocket League, Psyonix, the studio makes Rocket League, and obviously they own Fortnite. People are wondering, Dom, if this purchase is going to mean Fall Guys is just going to see another explosion because of Epic Games backing with their marketing and all of that, especially with the crossovers with their other properties, right? You get Fall Guys things in Rocket League, you get Rocket League things in Fall Guys, you get Fortnite things in Fall Guys. And also if maybe free-to-play is on the horizon for this game, because it definitely fits that mold of Fortnite and Rocket League where the base game is free and then the cosmetics is where you pull people in, right? And I think the other thing that has people excited is that Epic Games is really good at partnering with IP holders, as we just talked about with Hogwarts Legacy, to get their stuff in the game, right? We've seen with the epic crossovers with Fortnite. What do you think this acquisition means for Mediatonic? Like, do you think it's full bore on Fall Guys, and that's why Epic Games bought them? Or do you think that they have something else in store for that developer?
Yeah, because Fall Guys is about to come out on Switch. It's got to be coming to Xbox soon. I would imagine.
Same time, summer. Yeah,
okay.
They're both labeled for summer. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean that alone is going to reinvigorate the game and like the people who play that, because like it was a huge deal like last summer, right? Maybe into the fall, but it kind of
August-ish, I think, is when it came out on PS4 and PC. I think
it's simmered down somewhat, and that can happen, right? But like, all of a sudden you got Epic money and you're on double the platforms, so like your install base is almost doubling or whatever it is, and and then you add in some like way more additional crossovers and different skins and things like that. Like that's gonna be this Fall Guys could get like bigger than it ever was. Like it could like double like its player count than it had before, or whatever the numbers come out to be. Like I think that they're gonna go big on Fall Guys for sure. That doesn't mean that they won't have that developer doing other stuff too. They might like put some more money into the studio and expand it and have them do other things, but or bring them onto existing stuff that Epic might already have in them. I don't know what Epic does, but I think definitely Fall Guys is going to grow substantially.
Well, and then you think about the player base that Rocket League and Fortnite already have, right? And if you simply put a thing into either of those games where you unlock something in Fortnite by going and playing Fall Guys, that's already cross promotion right there. And even if you take out Rocket League, which has a far larger player base than people give it credit for, just Fortnite alone, if you're able to get a fraction of that player base to go and try Fall Guys and get hooked on it, especially with a lot of younger kids who the aesthetic of Fall Guys and everything totally lends itself to a younger audience, on top of possibly going free to play. Like Fall Guys can not only come out and be really big on PS4 and PC again, but it could hit the ground running on Xbox and Nintendo Switch. The Switch one I'm kind of worried about. I like to call it Fall Guys Compromised Edition because we've talked about so many times how Nintendo's online infrastructure is terrible. But Epic Games purchasing them, I think, is good for them, because if they hadn't been purchased by them, what if Fall Guys did continue to wane? What if the Xbox and Switch launches went okay but not well, and then a year from now we hear Mediatonic shuttered, right? Because Fall Guys just fell off a cliff. And part of Fall Guys falling off last year, I don't think it was entirely their fault. Among Us came out of nowhere, right? And took over the internet by storm. And now we have Valheim on the deck, right? The survival Viking game that everyone's in love with. And I think having the backing of Epic Games can help them continue to be popular and in the mainstream. And like I said, I think the crossovers is where a lot of the stuff can lie. You launch an Xbox and you launch a Nintendo in day one for 3 crowns, which are the currency you get for winning, Dom, in Fall Guys. You can get a Mario costume for your guy or a Master Chief costume. That'd be amazing. I think it just would work hand in hand for everybody. So excited for them. Glad they got purchased by a studio that's probably going to do a lot to market their game and have them be successful. It's really cool. And once again, like I said, it fits the aesthetic of Fortnite, which is awesome. Let's get into the big topic of the show. I talked about Nintendo, mentioned them, Dom. Me and you both have had Nintendo Switch. I've had mine since, I think, the end of 2017 when Odyssey came out. Did you get yours at launch? I don't remember.
Yeah, like launch day.
Day one, for Breath of the Wild. So you've owned yours a little bit longer than me, but we've pretty much been there for the last 3+ years. Bloomberg, this is a story by Takashi Machizuki and Sohee Kim. They're talking about a new Nintendo Switch model that could be in the works, Dom. So I'm going to read the story. We're going to go over their initial thoughts, and then I have a follow-up tweet by Jeff Grubb that I'd like to read as well, because he gives some added clarification, okay? So I'm going to go over this. If you want to read the full article, head over to Bloomberg. Mochizuki is one of the best writers over there at Bloomberg, next to Jason Schreier. They do amazing work, and Sohee Kim adding on to the story is dope too. So go give their work a look. Nintendo Company plans to unveil a model with Switch gaming console equipped with a bigger Samsung OLED display this year, hoping the larger touchscreen can prop up demand in time for the holidays, people familiar with the plan said. Samsung Display Company will start mass production of 7-inch 720p resolution OLED panels as early as June, with an initial monthly target of just under 1 million units, said the people, who asked not to be identified, discussing internal matters. The displays are slated for shipment to assemblers around July, the people said. Representatives for Nintendo and Samsung Display declined to comment. Quote, the OLED panel will consume less battery, offer higher contrast, and possibly faster response time when compared to the Switch's current liquid crystal display, said Yoshio Tamura, co-founder of display consultancy DSCC. Nintendo decided to go with the rigid OLED panels for the new model, the people said, a cheaper but less flexible alternative to the type commonly used for high-end smartphones. The latest model will also come with 4K ultra high-definition graphics when paired with TVs. They said. That could intensify a long-standing complaint of developers who have struggled with the difference in resolution between handheld and TV modes and now face a bigger gap between the two. The new display's resolution mirrors the current Switch and Switch Lite, but is an upgrade from the Switch's 6.2-inch and Lite's 5.5-inch. If the console's housing remains unchanged, the new Switch is likely to sport a thinner bezel. Before we hop into Jeff Grubb's tweets, what are your initial response to this, the story, a new Switch model? Are you okay with the 720p resolution, the OLED display? How do you feel, Dom?
No, this sounds pretty cool. Because it was the Vita, that originally, not originally, but as far as gaming, the original Vita had an OLED display, and people loved that
Vita.
about it. Yeah, people loved that about it, right? It had other problems, but the screen people just adored, and that was like really, especially high tech for at the time, which I think was like 2011 or 2012 time frame, right? So I think it's pretty cool that they're focusing on the screen, technology. I don't know what you call that categorization of it, OLED versus LCD, as opposed to resolution, which especially when you're on like handheld mode, isn't going to have as much of an impact. And granted, I've never seen an OLED screen, so I've not like been exposed to the beauty of that I keep hearing about. So supposedly it's a big difference.
So I want to interject real quick. I have a family member who has a LG OLED TV, which is like one of the ones that people really stand by. Mm-hmm. It's gorgeous, Tom. It's beautiful. And obviously, it's different. That's a huge TV compared to a smaller screen. So I could just imagine the density, which we'll get into in something I want to read next. But to your point, though, I think most people wouldn't complain that the resolution was terrible on the Switch. I think most of their complaints for handheld would be that the bezel's too big, right? I think it's huge. And the Joy-Con drift. I think those are the two things outside of the online infrastructure, which we talked about. I think the resolution plays a point when you talk about it being in docked mode. And the fact that it could be capable of 4K, I think that will excite people. The developers might get pissed off at the resolution difference between the two versions, and I totally get that. But from a consumer's perspective, I think they're nailing everything that people would want in terms of focusing on the resolution for the docked mode, and then for the handheld, focusing on that bezel. And they didn't mention the Joy-Con stuff, but hopefully they find a solution. Do you think that's the best thing there, that they didn't try to do some crazy 4K handheld and focus on the things people cared about, which is like the resolution on the TV versus a better quality of life experience handheld?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, we saw this with phones also, where like phones had a resolution race earlier on. Maybe like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago. Like each phone that came out was trying to like do a little bit higher resolution, right? And then it got to the point where I think like Sony had a 4K smartphone, and it came out and it was like, okay, like that's cool that you can say it's 4K, but like it doesn't really effectively do much to enhance the experience. And so like most, even like the latest iPhones and Samsung phones, I think are like, they kind of max out around 1440p. I want to say maybe not even that high, right? So like we kind of hit that cap of like it doesn't add much to keep bumping up the resolution. So I think on a handheld device, so I think it was smart for Nintendo to kind of follow the same model. Now, like maybe 1080p would have been nicer, but especially as you go up to 7 inches. But it's still like, even if that would have been nicer, like battery life is super important here too, because you're playing more demanding games on the Switch than anything on a phone typically, right? So
that goes to the quality of life on handheld. Yeah, I didn't even mention that, the battery life. Good point.
Yeah, I think that's more important.
And it seems like the plan is to launch these year. I think people get lost in the part where it talks about the going into production in June and July, right? But at the top of the article, it says a larger touchscreen can prop up demand in time for the holidays. So it seems like they want to get this out in time for the holidays, which is smart, because we've talked about how are they going to compete with these next-gen consoles. And though they don't need to directly compete in terms of performance, they do want, like, they're a company, they want to sell alongside their competitors in some fashion. Now, some people think that, like, Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out this year to launch next to this thing. I don't think so. I still think Breath of the Wild 2 is probably, like, early next year at the earliest. We know that Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are coming out. It could totally launch next to Pokemon games. We know how well Pokemon games sell. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But so say this thing comes out in November alongside those Pokemon games, Dom. Do you think there's a chance that either a Pikmin 4 or, being more shocking like a Odyssey 2 or, some kind of exclusive mainline title for Nintendo also comes out? Or do you think the best we get is this launching alongside those new Pokemon games, which are already confirmed for later this year?
I mean, there's just gotta be. I mean, not even thinking about the new Switch model. Like, there's what else is Nintendo doesn't have a big first party, game coming out this year, right? I mean, Skyward Sword, I suppose, in the summer, but obviously Pokemon's big, but those are remakes.
And those aren't first party.
And technically not even first party. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I gotta
golf
think
is the only thing we know about,
golf.
really.
That's right.
But that's
I just
in
gotta
June,
think.
I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I gotta think there's something else. Like, and I'm with you. I'm not betting on Breath of the Wild 2, but even if it was an additional remake, if it was like the Metroid collection or whatever, that could be it. But
or that Zelda collection, that would be pretty dope.
And so maybe like Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid 4 aren't ready this year, and so instead this year continues to be padded out by remakes, in the form of more Zelda, more the old Metroids too, and we got Pokemon we know about. I think that would keep them. Granted, the Switch is crazy successful, so like even if they did nothing, like it's gonna still do pretty well. But I gotta think that they're looking for more than just doing well, right? They want to like continue to kick ass, right? So it's got to be something else.
My crazy conspiracy theory. So people have been wondering, why is the Super Mario collection going away at the end of March? By the way, buy it if you haven't. I still need to buy it before the end of March. It's not going to go back on sale, Dom. They've already confirmed that. Like, when it's gone, it's gone. And I'm like, okay, it's a Nintendo being Nintendo. They're being weird, so it doesn't surprise me. But it would make sense for them to stop selling that at the end of the March, have people get desperate for a new Mario game. We have golf, but that's not like a Mario game. And then hit us with Super Mario Odyssey 2, right? Because we haven't seen anything from that game. We've seen Breath of the Wild 2 teases. We haven't even seen Super Mario Odyssey 2. And if you get people thirsty for more Mario, the first time Switch came around, it launched with Zelda and then got Mario later. What if this time around, this one launches with Mario and then we get Zelda months later, right? With Breath of the Wild 2. And it could be a flop of that. And not saying that either of those games are easy to develop, but from my mind's eye, knowing as much as I do about development, which isn't a whole lot, I think a sequel to Super Mario Odyssey 2 would be easier to turn around in less months than Breath of the Wild 2, right? That would be my assumption anyways. So that's my weird tinfoil hat conspiracy, is like the reason these things are ending in March is to create like generated thirst for Mario. So that way by the time the new Switch comes out alongside a Super Mario Odyssey 2 or whatever it is, that can drive sales even further. Who knows?
Dude, I mean, to your point about these are difficult games to make, Odyssey had 1,000 moons, right?
Yeah, and collected all of them, by the way.
Right. And Breath of the Wild had, I think 1,000 or 900 Korok seeds. And so each of those are, I think the Korok seeds were a little bit simpler puzzles and stuff, and than the moons, obviously. But like, each of those are individually handcrafted, right? Like someone designed each of those puzzles or like little parts of a level for that moon, and like one by one, they're deliberate, they're individually made. So like that's got to take a long time, dude. Right? Like.
Yeah, one also, it seems what we've been teased of Breath of the Wild 2 seems like they maybe are flipping the map on its head and you're going underground, which might be a completely new space to explore. Also, it seems like some of the rumors are saying they're going more towards a dungeon-based game design as opposed to what we got with, what were they called in Breath of the Wild? The challenge rooms?
The beasts, the divine beasts?
No, the challenge rooms.
Oh, they're just the shrines.
The shrines, right? Where you had a bunch of shrines, then you had the beasts that were kind of like dungeon-esque in their design. Rumors are that this one's going to be more focused on like a lot more dungeons. That was like the big critique they got, despite that game flawlessly scoring across the board. But with like Super Mario Odyssey, they already have the physics engine in place, and that's all about level design. I'm not saying that it's easy to develop, but when you already have a theming style down, you already have a mechanic down where you can add something onto it, I think they could turn that around in maybe months shorter than Breath of the Wild 2. But who knows? We'll see what happens. My big thing is I hope there's like a dope special edition, because I am going to purchase this when it comes out if it's exactly what all of this says, where it's better resolution and all of that. I'm excited. Are you looking to purchase this if we can get our hands on it, or you holding out maybe to get it when Breath of the Wild 2 finally comes out?
I think it depends. I mean, it depends on one, whether or not GameStop is doing another awesome trade-in thing like they did for the last Switch model that came out. and it depends. There's just a few more details. Like, does it? Is it like graphically more powerful? Like that, I think we don't know yet. Does it work with the same Joy-Cons, the same docks? Like, is this like a PS4 Pro, Xbox One, or is this like a DS Lite to the DS kind of a thing, right? I'm just curious to hear more about it. But there's a good possibility that I'll be in on it. It's sooner than later.
It's really funny too that the moment we got that Pokemon Legends Arceus trailer, people are like, "Ooh, this looks a little rough. It could definitely use the Switch Pro." And then like literally a few days later, this story broke from Bloomberg about like, "Oh, the Switch Pro," which would make sense that they'd want a Pokemon game like that on stronger hardware. But to your point, this is really just talking about the display. We don't know anything about the internals of this new system, which we'll probably get whenever they decide to unveil it. But speaking about the Nintendo Switch Pro, Jeff Grubb had this tweet because once this news happened, people started complaining, as the internet does. And I thought he had a really interesting thread of tweets I wanted to read real quick. So he said, "I'm begging you, before you give your Switch Pro takes, please look at the pixel density of 720p at 7 inches. It's 209 pixels per inch, which is equivalent to a Retina display. If you hold it 16 inches away from your face," which you almost certainly do if you're an adult, talking about how kids hold it really close to their face. So that's a very valid point. It will read like a Retina display because of the pixel density, which you mentioned earlier, of like, you don't need a 4K resolution on a handheld because that's just, it's a waste, right? Essentially. And go to that point, Jeff Grubb said 1080p in handheld is a waste of power, both in terms of performance and battery. Even on your phone, which probably has a super high resolution, games run at 720p because you won't notice the difference, but you would notice your battery draining in 20 minutes. He goes on, Nintendo absolutely could have bumped it up to 1080p to get the bigger number marketing buzz, but it's absolutely the right call not to do that. I will be reading and watching your reactions, and I'm going to wait for one of you a-holes to say some shit about 720p. And then he went on, and text and UI would be even smaller in 1080p, and the contrast improvements of OLED are going to be, I think he has a bunch of greater than signs, then a resolution bump. I can keep going. He even talked about how the people from Digital Foundry said the same thing. John Linneman from Digital Foundry said, "Currently, most big Switch games fail to reach 720p as is. The PPI, which is pixels per inch, is already high enough at the size. A 1080p screen would mean that most games use scaling. Native pixel resolution is always superior to filtered scaling." So basically just going on and on about how just because it says 720p, you shouldn't be upset about that. It's more, it being OLED and it looking like a Retina display is what you should be excited about. And I agree with him on a lot of this. Like, what's the point of having 1080p if the only thing you're seeing is your console doesn't last as long, right? If it drains the battery, if there is no huge difference in terms of visual fidelity. I don't know. If you want to follow Jeff Grubb, he's awesome. Obviously, he always talks about the Jeff Grubb summer mess at Jeff Grubb. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we close out the show, Dom, in terms of this new Switch? Do you think maybe we'll get an announcement of it in the coming months at E3, maybe?
Yeah,
Not
I'm
E3,
betting
the event itself, but like,
right.
E3 timing.
I'm betting they acknowledge it like officially in the next, couple months. Like there's like a press release or some kind of interview where they say like, yes, this is real, we're working on it. More info later, right? Because like especially now that like this leaked. I wonder if like they'll at least acknowledge it, and then probably in the summer will be a proper reveal. Then to have it go on sale a couple months after that, I think makes sense.
Yeah, and boy, people, if you thought getting the PS5 was hard, just wait till this bad boy comes out too. You're gonna be trouble. And even the Xbox too. Like I don't know how anybody like. I'm surprised every day I wake up, Dom, and I look at my Xbox Series X. I'm like, I'm thankful I have one because hearing the horror stories of people for both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X waiting for those sales, going to it, and just scalpers running away with all of them. It's awful. And you were able to snag a PS5, right?
Yeah, I was the lucky one. I didn't have to do any craziness either. I got the Sony Direct invite or whatever, and it was nice and smooth.
And it seems like it's commonplace. So like I have the new Xbox, you have the new PlayStation, but it's kind of rare that both of us have it, and it sucks that people aren't able to get their hands on it. But hopefully that changes in the coming months and throughout the year. In terms of what we've been playing, I've just been playing more Minecraft, honestly. It's a really zen game for me right now. It's a game where I can put on a podcast or music and just like focus on building projects and stuff. especially with quarantine and everything. I've wanted some activities to where I don't have to like think as hard, and I can just like, as the kids would say, vibe out. Just chill. So I'm having a blast with that. Obviously, nothing to report on there. Minecraft's Minecraft. That's pretty much it. I haven't had a chance to get back to Monster Sanctuary, which I do. Cool thing I found out about that game too is because it's like a weird like early access thing where it's getting updated. Dom, I wasn't sure if it had like a concrete ending. I saw some stuff where it turns out the game does have like a legitimate ending. So that's cool. So I'm glad because I have like a goal in mind now where I felt there was going to be a game where I could come back to you ever so often and just pick up whenever I wanted to because it was in that beta stage. But now knowing that there's a concrete end to that kind of wants me to push towards committing more time to it and completing it. And then I talked about Oxenfree last week, and I was excited to finish it, and I hadn't had a chance to go back to it, unfortunately. And there's a new roguelike that came out called Curse of the Dead Gods. Very strong Hades vibes. Obviously, I'm still waiting for Hades to come to Xbox, but in the meantime, this game looked like it was going to scratch that itch. Downloaded it, haven't had a chance, but that's basically what's on the platter for this coming week. Hopefully I can get to all of that stuff, but pretty much just Minecraft, man. That's pretty much all I've been watching, or playing, rather. I've been watching it, too, as I play. You said at the top of the show, more Neo stuff. Hit me with that Neo stuff, and then anything else you played.
Yeah, so it's done. It's finished.
Completed it. Nice. Platinum or just beat?
Just beat. I might come back and
have you glanced at the plat? Does it look hard?
I was looking at it this morning at what it would take, and it'd be pretty tough. It would take quite a bit longer. But it's not. You don't have to. So what else I learned looking into like how New Game Plus works in this game is like there's like a whole. This is basically a games as a service. Oh
well.
I'd argue it might even be better than most of them today. The way it's structured, it's really cool. Strong co-op elements for one. But like each New Game Plus cycle has like different tiered rewards that you get. And the mission structure is set up like they designed this game like way out into like New Game Plus 6 basically. Like they intentionally built it this way, and all the gear and how everything levels up, it's all intended to be played at that point. Like the first time you play through it is kind of like one game, and then there's something else after that's like an entirely different thing. It's really cool, and like the moment you beat the game, that final boss or whatever, and they give you, so I've talked about the loot before, and it's categorized by color. And so like, mostly you're getting whites, yellows, blues, and purples throughout the game, the purples being the best. And then as you beat the game, you get your first set of green weapons and armor, right? It gives you every type of weapon and armor in green. Like they call it divine, right? So that's like oh shit. You've been grinding and looting all game, and like all of a sudden like, oh, you get this green stuff, and it's like almost twice as powerful as everything you've ever had so far, and you're like, oh crap. It's like this huge dopamine hit. And I'm almost kind of like, oh, I see what they did there. Like that was like the biggest piece of bait to continue this game, was right there at the very end, which I think is pretty cool. Like that's them telling you like, oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Like this is where we go from here, right? But I don't know if I'm gonna actually take that bait or not. Maybe not. I need a break at least for now. But yeah, it was a pretty cool game. Like I complained about like the lacking enemy variety, but that never really got too much of a con for me. It was just kind of like they're fine, but like the way the difficulty ramps up for even like level to level is like kind of makes up for that almost. So
yeah,
and the bosses are all super cool and super challenging. But yeah, there's a lot more. So we'll see. This game was just a lot deeper and cooler than I realized, and it was like a free game, like a PS Plus game at some point that I finally turned on, right? So I probably will be more tempted to like get into the sequel next instead of like staying in this one.
Replaying it, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like a silly debate. It's like, well, had the sequel not existed, then it'd be different. But yeah, I really enjoyed this game. So
I love the aesthetics of the sequel. I remember seeing the trailer, and it seemed a lot more. Obviously, this is from an outsider's perspective. I have no damn idea. It seemed a lot more mystical than the first game in terms of just the way it was presenting itself through the marketing. So I wonder if they leaned into that because that's what people liked, like those parts of it, like the lore aspects of it. Because I remember the trailer had, I guess in the second one you can transform into like a bigger beast version of yourself, and it had the character being like circled by this mystical female spirit that was like a dragon of some sort. It looked really cool. So if you do hop into the sequel, or when you hop into the sequel, I'm interested to see how it compares both in terms of like that stuff, like the lore and the environmental storytelling, as well as the combat. And hopefully they resolve the issue of the lack of like enemy variety, you know. And I wonder what their evolution on that new game plus system you talked about is like. What if like, so to me, I know you said it seems like it's doing games of service better than a lot of other games, but I don't know many people that are going to play through a game 6 times to get to that stuff. You know, it seems like a large investment. Because how long is this game in terms of a playthrough?
I think I must have hit like 50 hours.
And then obviously every subsequent playthrough is shorter, right? I'd assume, because you know what you're doing.
I don't know, because I'm curious to try it out, because like that was something I've read, that like this is actually a games as a service, and then when the structure of the new game pluses were revealed to me, like, oh, okay. And then like the way like I described, like how they give you like loot and reward you, and how your progression is like more constant, even if it's bit by bit, and then larger chunks at certain points, like that's what it felt like to me. But like, especially when you think about games as a service as like melee combat, right? Like instead of first person shooter, like that's kind of probably the biggest thing that people would like better or worse about this one. But it doesn't really get that label enough, and maybe it's not as good as as like a Destiny or Avengers or Division or whatever in those aspects. But I think it would at least like be in that conversation if more people like. If there was more crossover in that player base, they would realize like this is really similar. It's just maybe not as many people, as that you're co-oping with, I guess, in Neo. I think you can only do like 2 or something. I'm not sure. I've only ever had I summoned 1 person once, but yeah. So
I just think it seems like a large investment, so I don't know how approachable it would be to a lot of players. I do like that it's different than other games of service style setups. But it's just like the moment you said like, oh yeah, with every playthrough, it's like it's like a large investment. You're talking to somebody who rarely ever plays even his favorite games through again. So it's like that type of investment is crazy to me, especially considering like the biggest hurdles levied at games of service games now is the grind of stuff that takes 10 to 15 hours. You know what I mean? And it obviously it's not necessarily a grind. You're playing through a narrative once again, but I don't know. It seems like for the absolute diehards, and in that point, maybe it was constructed that way. Maybe it wasn't made for everyone who plays Neo. Maybe it's like, oh no, there's added layers here for the people who absolutely can't get enough of Neo. And in that case, who cares if it applies to anybody? Who cares if it's appealing to anybody? As long as the hardcore people dig it, then there's more game for them to play. And as somebody who grew up as somebody who only could play or purchase maybe 1 or 2 new games a year outside of like Madden, having a game that evolves with every playthrough is cool because it rewards you for putting in that effort, which I think is awesome, so.
Yeah, because like the comparisons obviously were to all the From Software games, but like the From Software games are sort of built for multiple playthroughs, but like they're not really designed to like have new content, during those. It's just kind of like they're there and things are multiplying as you go or whatever, but everything is the same. Whereas this is the same levels, and that's where I really think about it. Where like I remember a lot of people like early on in Destiny who didn't understand like that game structure. That was their complaints of like, wait, so I'm just going through the same levels though, the same worlds over and over.
Yeah,
and just the enemies get tougher, and like that's where I dropped off. I was like, I don't really want it the same. Right?
It's the MMO. It's the MMO setup.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of there, and then it's feeding you new loot with higher numbers along the way, right? So I don't know, it's an interesting thing, and this is coming from me who's never like actually got into any kind of games as a service before, so it's a different perspective. But I think that probably the biggest part is like you mentioned, like accessibility is not as high as especially like an Avengers game, which I assume has got to be easier than this to get into. Obviously, then the IP, of course, is bigger. But like this game is tough, and it's toughest. I mean, it's just hard as shit. Like it gets easier like halfway through. I started to notice like I'm really getting the hang of it. But that's you're talking 20 some hours in. It's really punishing at the very beginning. So that's gonna drive like larger crowds away. Other than that hardcore you talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it though. I'm interested to see how the sequel holds up in comparison.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens. I still need to claim Ratchet and Clank off of PlayStation Plus now that you're.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's not even PlayStation Plus, just the PSN. Before I forget, for anybody out there, it's free. With their gameplay days or something like that. For anybody, you don't need PlayStation Plus. You can just go and download it, which is really cool. That's it for this week's show. If you want to, follow us on YouTube. You can search Controlled Interest. We'll pop right up. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you know when we upload new videos. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment letting me know what you think about the stuff we talked about. Let me know your perspective. Twitter, you can follow us collectively at CTRLINT. It's Controlled Interest abbreviated. We're also on Instagram at Controlled Interest if that's your preferred social network. Other than that, you can follow us individually on Twitter at Jerrad Wyche, that's JERRADWYCHE, and Dom at Dom's Oreos. We're on Spotify. We're on all of the listening places, Podbean, all of that stuff, wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. We'll catch you guys next week when maybe some big Bethesda Microsoft news drops. Catch you guys then. Bye.